and founders to seek mentoring, funding, just support, just brainstorming support as they build their businesses. And it's largely been driven from the the frustrating observation that while the startup ecosystems around the world and especially in India are just rapidly are on fire. There is capital flowing in. There are innovative business models, products being launched, being created. Hiring is an issue, but for some reason, women founders and entrepreneurs are conspicuous by their absence. So even in India, the numbers are some at 12% or something like that, where women funded businesses. And I think it's very well understood that women fund diverse teams, gender diverse businesses, women founded businesses, led businesses really do well in terms of outcomes, revenue, profitability, sustainability, and so on. So it's a very confounding question, and I don't have all the answers. But through CEO Club, what we try and do is bring together women entrepreneurs, investors, um, to talk about the issues, challenges, and provide support and mentorship. And we have had a number of other entrepreneurs and investors come on and speak to the group here. I'm super excited about the conversation today because you are my go-to person for investment advice, for fundraising advice, for building startups. And I'll just do a quick introduction of Priya and then hand over to you, Priya. So Priya is a dear friend and she wears many different hats. She built a very successful edtech businesses. One of the first ones to be sold to Byju's. It was called Vidyartha, and then decided to become venture capitalist. She's now been building Venture Highway as a venture fund for some time, which invests in early stage companies. Also a voracious reader. So would love to, Priya, over to you. Would love to hear about your journey, and what people want to hear about is your advice on women entrepreneurs seeking funding. How should they think about it, pitching their businesses, and how you went about it as an entrepreneur. And now, when you are on the other side of the table evaluating businesses, how do you go about evaluating some of these businesses? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Pooja. It's a pleasure being here. Pooja has been very kind in her introduction, and the feelings are absolutely mutual. So why don't I go on giving you guys a little bit of a background, and I'd like to keep it as interactive as possible. So at any point of time, just feel free to pause. Let's have a conversation rather than this being a long soliloquy. I'll start from the fact that I'm born and bred in Madras. I still call it Madras. I don't call it Chennai. Very, very bipolar Tambram family. What I mean by bipolar is my mother has been very, very traditional religious, while my dad has been completely opposite. That's why I call it bipolar. He was the first generation entrepreneur back then, went on to build one of the largest NBFCs. And, back then, we were, I would say, pre my dad, we were middle class, perhaps even lower middle class. And the reason I bring this up is like, he was the first person I remember to dream and audaciously dream, right? Like it was incredible, right? It's just fascinating to see a guy who's like never been in a car and never like experienced the fine styles of life to say, hey, listen, I'm going to build this amazing stuff. And I grew up listening to him. And my mother has been as demure and as grounded in middle class as one can be. And as fate would have it, the company went public, and I've been, on the sidelines, understanding how it grew. And I used to watch him in office and all that. 1998, CRB capital scam happened, and there was a whole rush of NBFCs. I don't know if you guys recall this. And my father's company was one of the biggest collateral damages of that. And I'm not getting into the details of that, but the biggest life lesson I learned then was, we as a family we went through a lot. Besides reputation loss and managing a lot of legal battles and thing, the biggest wow I took that day was like, I would never be risk seeking. I would never do what my dad did. I held on to education to for dear life. And I remember that there was a period of time that we really didn't have money because it was all blocked and locked by the authorities. So literally, a spate of not having electricity, and we've seen, my brother and I've seen a fair bit of an extraordinary time in life. And I fortunately, the reason I'm able to say this with a very very nonchalant demeanor today is because I feel that that's something that's shaped me as an individual and a personality. And the reason I bring that up is, ironically, while I told myself I will never be a risk taker, I would never do this, and I would be somebody who's a salaried employee who is figuring out month on month expenses, it's exactly what I didn't do. I took all the risk, and in fact, even worse than what my dad did. So in 2012, when I decided to start Vidyartha, I'll give you a little bit of a background. Got married, had a 2-year-old child based out of Chennai. I finished my ISB. I finished ISB, came back to Chennai. I was working for an investment bank here. The reason I was stuck to Chennai is because my husband had a manufacturing outlet. He was also a first generation founder then, really grappling for liquidity. And we just bought our first home, which you can't see, but it's the virtual background. But this is our first home. We barely made EMI, and we barely made everything. And then I said, no, I don't want to do this. I'm going to start something. And it was incredible, when I think back, what a nut job I must have been to have a 2-year-old, not having enough liquidity, not making EMI, and then wanting to quit my reasonably stable job to start something. And then I realized that that is probably the single quality of mine which has taken me where I am, which is this immense risk seeking and ability to kind of sometimes jump off the cliff without knowing if there is a bottom and where the bottom is. But having said that, as the years went by, I think I have learned to understand downside a little bit more, understand what downsides work for me and what doesn't. And I would say get to a more calculated risk taking. But that's been a pivotal point for me when I started with Yasa. So I'll pause here. I've been going on a long soliloquy. If anybody wants to steer me in a direction, I'm happy to take the conversation accordingly.
I will just add a comment here, Priya. This is kind of, some of these things in hindsight, you kind of think about it, but this is so inherent as a personality, the way you evaluate risks or the way you want to jump in. If you see a problem, you just want to solve it. And, however rationally you try to kind of structure it and say, I'm not going to do it, but it's such an inherent part of the personality that you just end up doing it over and over again. And I can very much relate to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. There are two parts to it, right? Like for me, the framework is, I think women in general are probably better at problem solving because we are probably, and there's also a negative part to it, and I'll talk about it. I think we don't care about attribution. So I think inherently we are not the ones to say, I want credit for solving this problem. We like to take the problem, break it down, and then solve it. Right now, the lack of need of attribution in some ways has also caused us to kind of I would say it's an evolutionary thing that because we don't necessarily care about the attribution. Sometimes I feel like it's 5x done and 1x spoken about, and I would see that in most of the cases. I mean, there will always be outliers, but I have also, the reason I started with the whole risk taking ability is uh, women actually very often, and the ones that I mentor at least, they don't realize that the value and the quality of work that they do and how complex a problem that they are solving. Whereas the attribution part, which is how much do I need to get compensated, how much can I push the boundaries, how much can I take the risk, is something that very few women think about,
Hmm.
right? And for some reason, it could be family pressure, structural issues, or whatever. But like I said, that ability to jump in and see, let's see what happens, we will figure it out. I would say that somehow that, and I could be biased, and I'd love to hear counterpoints here. That I've seen that's a part where we can genuinely work on, because even in normal life, leave the risk aside, the complexity of problems that many of the women I admire solve is very high. It's just that they like to package it in a certain safe environment. They're going to be solving similar or perhaps even lower complex problems, but they don't want to take the risk associated or the attribution associated to it. And that's the difference in my view.
And one of the things I have benefited from there, Priya, I of course find myself doing the same thing along with so many of my friends who are very successful entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, and so on. But one of the common factors I found is then some of the friends or your challenge friends. There is a group of challenge friends and there is a group of support friends who will just challenge you to say, "Why are you thinking like this?" Or you have to force yourself to do it. And I think that has gone a long way, at least for me and some of the people I know, women I know, to kind of, because I don't know, it's maybe social conditioning, it's how we think, it's how we're wired, but just it's harder, it's easier to see it for another friend, for another person than for yourself.
Oh, absolutely.
And so doing it for others in your friend circle network really helps. That's one of the things that I think goes a long way. But what would be very I have heard some of this story, but what would be useful for others is, how did you think about it in the context of Vidyartha at that time when you were kind of coming out with your sets of notions and you decided to jump into a very difficult area at that time? And edtech
Now,
now suddenly has become a very hot sector, but that was not the case at that time.
absolutely.
It was a tough business to build. Working with schools was just non-glamorous, hard task. So how did you go about thinking about taking the plunge and building Vidyartha and then seeing it all the way to the exit?
So I think I'll be very candid here. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me, if I ever do another stint, is I didn't spend enough time understanding the market and the problem statement. I jumped into it and learned along the way, and then I would say some amount of resilience and perseverance saw me through the end line. But I didn't do enough work, not the quality of work that I see some of the current founders that I work with, the clarity of thought, the insight. Uh, See, one is to understand the problem, but then two is to kind of break down the problem as to why is the timing right now? That is perhaps the most important question you need to ask yourself as a founder. And why would customers take you today? Right. And that is the second most important question you need. I don't think I did enough work there. For me, starting something was very romantic at the point of start, because for me, I was like, listen, I'm a reasonably smart person and I don't want to work for somebody. And I think I can build something bigger. It was fairly a vanity kind of a reason that I started. But then you get sucked into it. You're absolutely right. 2012 was perhaps the worst time to start something in edtech. Literally, it was a graveyard of failures. Every VC who had taken a position had burnt their fingers in edtech. So we started off as a B2B. Like we started off as, the problem statement initially was, there's a huge amount of information, sort of information breakage when it comes to careers and available options for kids in India compared to the US. Can we use tech to solve that problem? That was a very narrow thing. But as we started doing it, we realized that unfortunately, even today in India, this whole career guidance is still a good to have, but not a must have. What essentially the way parents think of career options is essentially boiling it down to very tactical aspects. And it's very different in the West. And Pooja, you would know this very well, is to what group I need to take in grade 11, right? And that's as tactical. I mean, they don't think about it from a long term perspective. They want to, essentially worry about, do I take PCMB? Or do I take math or not take math? Do I take science or not take science? So we realized this very quickly. And I think, to cut the long story short, the biggest pivot we made was, look, let's not do the B2B. And trust me, the B2B school sales, we actually did a great job. It's just that because the market was so unforgiving and because investors were so wary, I sold the first 30 schools myself. So one of the thumb rules I have is, when you want to manage people, you need to know what to manage. You need to know what metrics to manage. So it was hard. So when you said schools are hard, I still remember this time when I went to sell to 6 schools in Vijayawada, and I had to come back from Vijayawada to Hyderabad to stay. And I was like care of a lot of friends because you don't have money to spend on fancy hotels. Then I was stuck in the middle of a railway station in Vijayawada at 11:30 in the night, and I didn't know when the next one is. Go all alone. And that's the moment, and a moment of epiphany where I said, why am I doing this? What am I doing this? But then I was like back in Hyderabad to sell to the next 5 schools. So the first 30, 35 schools, and we brought in all the big accounts, right? Naveen, my co-founder, and I, Doon, Assam Valley, where we traveled individually, sold. But what people should realize is selling to the first 30 is different to the selling to the first 100 to making it to the 1,000 and making it to 10,000. Building a scalable playbook is a very different ballgame. And that's when we realized for us to build a scalable playbook, we need to pivot from a B2B, which is very school sensitive, and getting money out of schools was very, very hard. So then how do we make this? So incidentally, we realized the kind of data that was flowing into the platform. We created a lot of proprietary diagnostic tests, and we had a lot of engagement in our product where we realized we were able to get the interest, personality, what grades they are getting in school. And then we started putting an aptitude test to understand. Then we said, hey, wait, we're looking at it in the wrong way. Why don't we take a step back and see if, instead of talking about it in a limiting view of career guidance, can we make it a learning platform itself? Which is to say, how do we help parents at any point of time benchmark if the interest of the kids is matching with their aptitudes and matching with their performance, and what are the gaps and what kind of interventions that you need to take? Because today, as you all know, Byju's is a push strategy, right? Maybe we don't even want Byju's. Maybe we don't even want White Hat Junior. Why are we buying products without any connection to the need of the child? And that's what we decided to solve. So we reframed the problem statement to saying, let's create the best diagnostic tool which tells the parents, hey, your child is interested in physics, but in mechanical reasoning, he or she is only 30 percentile in school, but 20 percentile in Guntur as a district. And in physics marks, she's got 75, which means she could be a rote learner. She's above average, maybe in 75, because very often you don't know even if the school is good. I'm talking about the middle range CBSE schools, right? That's the benchmark, and that took off because parents love that kind of scoring. They love the kind of very data driven kind of advisory that we gave, because they don't like somebody to say, hey, I think your child should take physics. I think, why is my child not good? I want my child to take science. And I think that's when we pivoted, and I worked very hard, and we got into CBSE, worked very hard to get inroads into CBSE, and we struck our first large deal with CBSE where we did a massive implementation of 3,000, 5,000 schools. And that was a game changer with the kind of data and everything. And then we said, look, now that we've got this, we've got the trust of the parents, we've got the trust of the schools, can we build a commerce layer where we tell each parent, we will curate the interventions that you need and which is relevant to your child, and then build. So your child maybe does not need a Byju's, it needs a Kumon because the guy is smart, he's able to crack it, but the gap is only on probably the calculation or probably the method of doing. So he will need. So that was the idea. We wanted to be a largest diagnostic led, then a PaaS platform, which is platform as a service, where we don't want to reinvent the wheel on intervention, but tie in the relevant products for the relevant kids based on this. And that's when we were out in the rounds to raise our Series A. We had done about 4,000 schools with 150K fundraise, right? And we had very good metrics, very good engagement metrics. But I have heard nothing but no from venture capitalists, right? And the hardest thing, and that's why I tell my team, video bloody on all the time. The hardest thing is to pitch to somebody when somebody is busy on a phone. When you're giving it might be the shittiest idea, right? But you draw, at least I draw energy from the faces I see and the expressions I get and the body language I see. And I think that was, and that's the, I've realized that about myself. I am thick skinned because I've told myself, what's the worst thing people will say no? And that has helped me kind of pick up the energy because it's pretty hard to go there. And when you see in 5 minutes, there's a disinterest. But, and I'll come to some of the takeaways there. But then anyway, went the rounds and then met Sequoia, and we had very good metrics to compare to the companies that had raised money then. But then I understand because they were like, nobody was taking off, right? For the amount of capital that had gone in, not many companies were taking off. And there was a general concern about ed tech as a, for example, health tech is still like, everybody wants to do health, but very few companies have really taken off. And then that's when we met Sequoia. And then, the partner there said, look, we really like what you've done. We really like the fact that you have 3,500 schools. Why don't you work with our, a new investment that we did? And that's when got introduced to Baiju. I met Baiju. I flew to Chennai. No, I was in Chennai. I met Baiju, I still remember, in a hotel. And we spent 3 days back to back in the night between 8 to 11. And, I just loved his energy. And I figured that this guy is a special guy. And said that, this is somebody I would like to learn from and partner with. And the idea was, we will take care of the school channel sales, right? Like the B2B to C sales, where we do the diagnostic and then they, kind of put together the product. And that's when the sale happened. Sorry, it was a long kind of a story, but.
No, fantastic, Priya. This is was really a fascinating journey. And, some of the things that I was kind of picking up, one is just continuously looking at customer feedback. So while having a fair idea of where you want to go, having your North Star vision, this is what we want to build, but along the journey, just having your ears to the ground from based to hear from customers what is working, what is not working, the role of data to be able to do that, just because you were able to create a platform where you're capturing all that data in order to make sense of some of this feedback that you were able to, when CBSC came along, all of those fundamental building blocks really supported you in scaling the business. Uh, yeah, fascinating journey. And now, Priya, that you are on the other side of the table, how do you see risk? How do you evaluate entrepreneurs? I'm sure there are a lot of entrepreneurs here who are in the process of raising their seed rounds, first round of funding. What is it that you look for in an entrepreneur, in the business, in the idea? How much does the pitch deck matter? How do you evaluate the whole package as you must be speaking to like hundreds of entrepreneurs in a month as you invest?
Yeah. So actually, before I go into this answer, I want to start with a caveat, and I don't know how self-serving this caveat is as a VC, but hey, I'm an operator turned VC, so I have that. I take that advantage. I think, look, VCs are humans as well. It's a human decision making. So no decision is etched in stone. It's a perspective, and we're all paid for our opinion. So the one thing I want to leave founders with, and that's what got me going, is actually, I'll take a step back, Pooja, and I want to make this one point and then I'll go on to explain, is one of the things as a founder, I want to close the loop, is how to view feedback, right? And especially from VCs and both your yay sayers as well as your naysayers. How do you take feedback? And there's a very thin line to persistence and dog-headedness, right? So it's very, very hard to kind of separate the two. So at least the framework that I use is, at the end of every meeting, keep the person out of the feedback, right? And actually look at the feedback. And, because the person kind of colors the feedback, depending on their body language, depending on how you like them, dislike them, the believability index, how senior, how junior they are. But look at the feedback. And for me, the pivotal case of changing from a B2B to a B2B to C was from a VC who basically, literally dismissed us in 10 minutes saying, okay, you guys don't realize you're working all this hard for what? What is the big game here, right? Like, And at the end of the day, obviously, we came out and we were disappointed. But then I remember, during lunch, I said that feedback is relevant, right? Like, what is the holy grail? So similarly, when you go and pitch to VCs or anybody, I would just say take the feedback, and you need to have your own mental models and personal frameworks to say what part of the feedback is truly relevant for us to work on, and what do you truly brush off. Because, at the end of the day, we're all working as founders. You're working on a one or two truths, like Peter Thiel says, which very few people agree with you on.
True.
So you just need to keep fine tuning that. Now, coming to the my whole risk assessment, I think as an early stage VC, we are very, very risk. Our appetite is extremely risk, high on the risk, right? And um, and we have bet on companies literally on an idea phase where, like, the founders have come and said, "This is the idea," but and think of it like a continuum. There is the business, the idea, the quality of the business and the model, and the founders. And generally in the continuum, we lean more towards the founders, because at the stage that we invest in, the people are everything, right? So that's something that's a framework that I personally use. Of course, there have been some cases where, I know that the market is something that I'm not comfortable with, or you're not convinced about. But even then, if the founders are trump cards, we may take a bet. But if it's a very hot, it's a very kind of crowded market, that's when it's a little bit of a suspect. But otherwise, largely we lean towards the founders. And in the founders, in a pitch deck, I love both kinds of conversation, which is, it's structured, you go through a pitch deck and it's great, or you just want to have a talk, that's also fine. But what I do look for is very, very high clarity of thought. And you will get that in the first 5 minutes, right? Very often, 80% of the founders, you'll be surprised, are unable to articulate in one line what the hell they do. And I was part of that as well. That ability to step back and say, what am I doing? What is that one line or two line proposition of my solution? You would be surprised how very few founders are able to describe that. And adding to that unique insight, I definitely look for, is something that they're saying is something that makes me go, wow, I never thought about it this way. I never, understood it this way. And this unique insight typically comes from people who have done, I'm not going to get into the domain expertise or the background of the founders, but somebody who's customer obsessed, their ability to kind of deeply explain about their customer persona. Now, on the customer persona, I am actually okay if you go and I'm not a person who's going to get excited when you come and tell me it's a 5 billion TAM and a 6 billion SOM and a ROM and a PAM I don't care about all of that. Even if you come and tell me, like, as specific a customer persona, that's what I personally like, right? Somebody is able to come and say, I am looking for 25 to 35-year-olds, IT professionals who make about 12 lakhs to 30 lakhs a year, and who has X% disposable income, who's on cred, who has two cred. That is somebody I love, because that's how deeply they've thought about the customer persona. Because generally, getting the initial product market fit is the hardest, and that's where the companies drop off. And if you're not able to get as specific as your customer, as specific on your problem statement, and as specific on what you're solving today, then no matter how big a vision, it's going to be hard to get there, because you've not got through the first staircase. So that's something I look. How well do they know the customer persona? How well they're able to articulate the customer persona. And the third important thing I look for is, how vulnerable is the founder? Generally, I'm wary of people who come and say, I know it all and I've figured it out. And you can get the pulse of when you question them, how defensive they get and how, they react. I love people who are very honest about the fact that, hey, I figured this out. I haven't figured this out. I will figure it out. I love that attitude, because then what happens is, that these people have freed themselves of the mental space of that false bravado. And I've written an article on that, and I'm very passionate about that topic, about this whole economic benefit of showing your vulnerability, because then use your mental bandwidth to constantly compound and improve yourself. And that is everything to a founder, right? The learning agility, the ability to keep compounding and, learning. And that will come only if you're self aware of your gaps and you're open to even acknowledging that. So that's something I look for. And the fourth one is somebody who actually also have questions for me, because very often it's like they come and it's like there's a rigmarole, right? Like they do 6 7 pitches. So I like people who've spent a little bit of time to even thinking what is their cap table all about. And you'd be surprised how very few founders think about their cap table. I know as a founder, one can dismiss it off saying, boss, let's first get the money and then we'll worry about it. Very often we don't. But even then, that's like, it's something it's worth thinking about. It's not like all of us are going to be able to raise from a Sequoia or the named VCs, but it's okay to think about your cap table, what kind of investors you need, what value add that they bring. And it's always good, not just in VC, in a sales meeting, in anything personally, to do research on the person that you're speaking with so that you can contextualize the conversation even more. And finally, the best meetings I've had are conversations where it's a two-way street, where they've excited me enough that I've talked to them, they've talked to me, not a monologue of 10 minutes, right? Because human being, we switch off, especially with the Zoom fatigue. I'm sure, I don't know, I've been talking for so long. You get into a fatigue, right? Like after 5 minutes, you're switching off. I think that's important. So these are the 4 5 things I genuinely look for.
Fantastic. Guys, any questions? I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs who here who have been talking to me about fundraising. If you have any questions, this is the time.
So I had a question, Priya. That was wonderful. First of all, I want to thank you for sharing a lot of your personal experiences and vulnerabilities, the tough times you went through, and sharing them with us, because that gives us this confidence that whatever we are going through, it's not the worst, or whatever we might believe. So that's kind of morale booster in a way, and not a lot of people do it. They come across as we've got it all and we figured it out. So then it's all the more difficult for entrepreneurs to kind of relate to them. So here, really appreciate you doing that, being very brave about it. And Pooja, thanks for the wonderful questions. My question was that if you're doing, kind of a seed fundraise, what are the things you should be focusing on as the first raise, and what are the things you should avoid for a seed fundraise?
Got it. That's a very broad question. Let me try to kind of answer it, at least from my perspective, Kanchan. I think when you're looking at a seed fundraise, couple of things that you need to be ready with is a seed fundraise is all about, have you got your team intact, right? That's very important, right? I'm not even getting into the idea. I'm assuming that one does enough research on the idea, and I've already spoken about the customer research and the business model and all that. That I'm not going to talk about that. But is the team right? So because one of the biggest questions an investor asks themselves is, if I like this market, why is this team the best team to build in that market, right? So how have you got your team intact? The second thing is, like I said, the clarity of thought. What is this idea? Because look, and there is this pitch. I mean, I've written 2 blogs, and I'm happy to refer in LinkedIn, which is called, that introductory slide, right? And you will find 2 types of investors. One who already have a thesis on, for example, let me make it even more pointed. Let's say I'm evaluating a company in the mental health space, right? My team is building a thesis on it. We've like gone a little deeper. We've understood what kind of North Star metrics that we want. So there's a little bit of an education already, right? So you need to understand whether and figure out whether this investor is educated in that vertical. Do they have a thesis? Because then your job is to up the conversation and give them newer insights and explain to them why is it that you are well poised to kind of do well in that particular segment. Vis-a-vis, there are some cases where the investor needs to get educated. So there, the reason I bring the difference between these two is you have to decide how simple you need to keep it, because your first meeting is about getting them excited for the second meeting.
Mhm.
So overcomplicating it, putting too much there, peel it like an onion, right? That's very important as a pitch,
Right.
right? And the thing that I would totally avoid is I get overwhelmed when people come and say, I've got a 3 year projection. Boss, we don't know what's going to happen in 3 months or 6 months,
Mhm.
right? So I'm not, I mean, at least personally, I am not going to get enamored by the fact that somebody gives me an Excel sheet with 3 year projection. What I need to see is really how have you thought through the next 6 months, right?
Mhm.
Because if you say this is your target customers, I would love it if you say, hey, listen, I'm going to get the first 1,000 or forget 1,000. I'm going to get the first 100 customers in
Mhm.
the next thing. If you already have some traction, great. How do you build on it? If you're very new, then how are you going to get your first 100? And it's totally okay to do jugaad. Every founder thinks that it's a magic, it's going to be product led growth. Immediately the product is going to like this. I just throw some digital marketing and there's going to be lakhs, and it doesn't work like that. Your first 100 customers for almost 90% of the businesses is jugaad, right? How do you get that? If you're able to layer that out a little bit more, to me, I get very excited, right? Like,
Mhm.
if you've thought through how do I get my first 100 customers, what am I going to learn from that, right? Is the next thing. Then finally, coming back to the team, I have seen two types. I look for a well balanced team. And since we invest in tech startups, I am more biased towards teams where it has a strong tech person inside, right? While there are cases where many of them land up outsourcing tech to say that I'll bring them later in house. Personally, for me, I like it if the CTO is baked in as a co founder in teams. I prefer that way. So, what I need to see is great product thinking, great business thinking, great tech thinking, right? I need to see these capabilities. I mean, not all three can be spikes, but at least the founders can kind of manage those abilities, right?
Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
very important, right? And finally, some of the traits that I look for is ability to hire great teams, right? And that's Pooja, unfortunately, and it's just data, right? Women's ability to hire great teams. Why aren't we leveraging networks enough? If
Hmm.
I see a guy who comes from IIT Kanpur, you'd be surprised that 20 of his first blokes will be IIT Kanpur, IIT Kharagpur, IIT Bombay. They
Hmm.
will pick up stuff. I've not seen that kind of hustle in hiring. Of course,
Mhm.
the base is so small, so I can't even comment on whether it'll apply to the larger category. But the ability to leverage networks and get the best brains, because if you are able to convince me tomorrow or Pooja to join you as a co-founder, that's validation for me that you're getting somebody really sharp to join you.
Yes.
So these are the broad points, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, they do completely. And in fact, they're a revelation to me. Thank you, Priya. Thank you.
And Priya, one of the other things, like you said, and I see it as an entrepreneur, right? It's so hard to project 3 years, 5 years down the road. The market, the tech, everything is changing so rapidly. And
Hmm.
then there are black swan events like COVID coming in. But when, as a founder, you talk to an investor about, um, so just striking the right balance between it being a niche market versus a large market, right? If you just focus on, say, next 100 customers, next 500 customers, like you said, the question that will come up is it's a small category, or it's a small market, and how do you expand? So not large enough for us. So while you are great at implementing it and at executing in this space, and you understand this very well, but it's not a large enough market for us. Whereas if you go very broad, then what happens is you have these large competitors playing in this market. How are you going to compete against them? So I don't know where that right balance is. And do
That's
you?
a brilliant question. And look, there is no right answer, and that's why I'm saying it's the way I think. I'm not sure if all investors, if you look at any frameworks, right? You take any top scale companies, whether it's Slack,
Hmm,
whether it is Airbnb, whether it is anything, many of them initially appear to be a sneakily small market.
right.
What some of the best companies have done is understood that one clear product hook, customer pain point, even if it seems very small now, and quickly got their first 100 and then kind of expanded there, right? So, in all this, Pooja, very often the narrative has to be driven by the founder, how thought through they are, how clear they are. Like at the end of the day, it's a gut. I mean, oh my God, she knows what she's talking about.
Hmm.
He knows what he's talking about, right? So, for me as an investor, given that I come from an operating background, I look at it from this lens. The largest market could be great. Of course, I don't want to invest in niche small markets. But you don't tell me, I'm not also enamored by the fact that you're going to, every third founder says it's a 5 billion, 10 billion, 15 billion, because that's what everybody will say. And
Right.
nobody's going to come and admittedly, say that I'm going to go behind $100 million market. Nobody is going to say that.
Hmm.
But that aside, if your first 6 months go to market strategy is not clear, right? My belief is you guys will know how to navigate, you will know how to pivot. But if
Hmm.
I don't see a sense of how you're going to take your first 5 steps, uh, then rest of it is conjecture, right? But that's my personal style.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I think that's very much educated by your own journey as an entrepreneur. I
Exactly.
do find that to be a difference between. I find it so much easier to connect with investors who have been entrepreneurs themselves versus investment bankers who become early stage entrepreneurs, because their way of thinking of the world is different. They've not been through the grind, because any entrepreneur you speak to has gone through that grind of getting the first 100 customers in the door with no brand to back you up, no product to back you up. You just have to go and hustle and get that going, right?
Correct. But
So
there, the reason second time founders get premium is
right.
the belief that they've gone through that experience with somebody else.
Yeah.
So when you look at somebody, say, who's a growth head of Flipkart,
Hmm.
right, or growth head of Mintra, the belief at least is that he doesn't have to relearn some of the things, which is why getting a great team up front is definitely going to be a great advantage compared to all people out there, and which is why you're seeing seed rounds today
Hmm.
expanding, because these are second time founders, CXOs, who come in and say, listen, I'm going to start this. And the belief is their learning curve is very high compared to the other guys.
Right, 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 right. So I mean, the two things I hear you saying that, the whole thing of, yes, it's okay to say you're going after 100 customers, but then to demonstrate how you will use tech as a leverage, or your past experience as an entrepreneur as a leverage, to one, scale it up and reduce the learning curve, or make it,
Absolutely. The biggest thing, Pooja, is customer love, right? For me, that tells everything. In all this, see, the problem is, and I'm the first person to acknowledge, India is at the cusp of where the valley was like probably 10, 15 years
right.
ago. Which means there's too much capital, there's too much noise, and there's too much. Everybody is figuring out. But at the end of the day, as a founder, if I were a founder at this, capital fundraising has become a very important skill as well. But in the
Absolutely.
process of fundraising, what happens is at the end of the day, like Series A, Series B, Series C, but your fundamentals have to match, no? That also has to match, which means at the end of the day, predominantly you need to focus on a business which is sustainable, which is solving a real problem, which is solving a real problem for a set of customers.
Hmm.
That's why I keep going back and I love reading these frameworks for Slack and Airbnb, and even the latest ones. There's this Unit 21. I don't know if you've heard. There's an Indian founder in it. See, they are basically anti-money laundering, and that's what they started with. But essentially, they're going into a much bigger market. But the way generally companies that have taken off, it's like somehow they chance upon a set of customers who love the product,
Hmm.
and then there's no stopping them after that.
Yes.
We need to find that marriage soon.
This reminded me of, again, I was hearing a podcast of the Twilio founder. And after like 4 or 5 pivots and things not going right, and these were like smart guys from MIT and Harvard, the founding team of like 4 or 5 guys. And apparently, there was that one API when they were about to give up, money had run out, and there was this one API that built it for their internal systems, that made put it out in an open source platform, and that took off, and they built their whole business around it from there on.
Hmm.
Um, So great. Renu, you had a question on gender lens investing.
Yeah. So Priya, fantastic. Whatever I've heard is so phenomenal, especially coming from entrepreneurs themselves. It is like you both of you said that it strikes a chord. So from gender lens investing, I want to know a little bit on both sides of the table. I have a feeling that when women are pitching, they sort of don't put themselves out there fully. There's some reservation or something. So while we a lot of times we end up saying that on the other side of the table they are all men and they don't understand sometimes the product that we are pitching or whatever. But there's something that is holding us back also. So I would love to hear, since you've been on both sides, I would love to hear your take on whatever you want to pick up first.
I mean, this question, I've been on a lot of panels, and this is a very complex, honestly, question as well as an answer. I think we all agree that when we talk about gender lens, we just want to democratize the opportunity. We don't want to lower the bar, right? And whether it's hiring or anything, right? You want to make sure that everybody gets an equal opportunity, but we won't lower the bar. I'll tell you my personal experiences of women having okay, let me start with me pitching. I genuinely haven't felt that I have been disadvantaged by the fact that I'm a woman, right? I think it was a tough space, and literally every investor who had given me feedback, of course, I might have reservations of the style of giving feedback, their ability to close the loop. That's a very personality driven thing, but just taking the feedback, I don't think anything that's happened was unfair. I personally felt that I've been disadvantaged, and I was also the face of the company, and I felt that, and like I said, I think largely the power of articulation, clarity of thought, if you have those, it works. Now, coming to the my experience as an investor, firstly, it's abysmally few number of women founders who've pitched to me. Abysmally, very, very small sample size. Among the sample size, it's amazing pedigreed women, right? Like I've seen quite a few who got into Y Combinator. They come from excellent backgrounds, Stanford, Harvard, and amazing diction, clarity of thought, articulation. And if at all we have passed, to me at least, it is probably because of our lack of conviction on the business or the market, or our lack of awareness of the business or the market. But I don't think it's any way got to do with the fact that it had women founders behind it. And I've thought about it a lot. At least I don't think that's the because we reject 90% of the companies we meet. I mean, that's the nature of our business. Now, many of them could be misses because, like I said, at the end of the day, we're all paid for our opinion. Not necessarily our opinion is right. But if the sample size is so small, unfortunately, I'm not able to give you enough data points to say that it's because of the fact that we are holding ourselves back. But now let's leave the pitching aside. In general, when women approach or for mentorship, firstly, I don't know if you guys have seen this. Very few women actually reach out, do cold emails for mentorship. Right? They don't put themselves out there. And I don't know what is putting themselves out there. This is part of the job description, right? Like I have to write 5 cold emails to a customer. Why aren't you? And if you're serious about, that's why, these are all for me pointers to, unfortunately, all things being equal, how serious you are about anything you want to do, right? And how much you're willing to go to the next level, right? Like, so you can't say I'm shy. I mean, boss, like I said, I will democratize the opportunity. I won't lower the bar. So for me, I need to see that, that intent, for the lack of a better word. So I have on an average in a week, at least 2-3 people writing to me saying, can I just speak to you? No agenda. So I'll say, no, I've already invested. Look at this portfolio company. And they will push me saying, listen, I know you're invested. I'm not looking at an investment. I know you've been a founder before. Can I get 10 minutes of your time? I love that. Right? I mean, unfortunately, the sample size of women writing to me like that is very low. I mean, maybe also the fact that we're all under the radar. See, that's another thing we know. I mean, like a lot of my fellow VCs are on Twitter, and this is a common joke I have with my office also, is that you have to put yourself out there. You have to. I genuinely don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. And like Pooja and I read a lot, but the more I read, the more ignorant I feel. I genuinely don't know what to say. So I think it's a cyclical thing. Like, we don't get discovered enough. And because we don't get discovered enough, we don't expand our networks enough. And because we don't expand our networks enough, our core cycle, like Pooja said, the 5 challenges, maybe we could have get 10x better challenges, but we don't go and seek them out, right? And that, I think, is a very gender specific thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. So we just, I don't know, there's something that holds us back. And just I think this is a great answer. It answers both sides. Thank you.
One of the things I really picked up, Priya, is this whole hiring thing. I've been thinking about this as well, and maybe and as CEO, we are trying to do whatever we can. But I think even just women coming out of some of the colleges, etc. I think there is work to be done there to make sure they're part of some networks where the kind of camaraderie or push or networking that exists for guys coming out from an IIT Kanpur or a Delhi, whatever, translates to women as well. And like you said, it's a cyclical, complex issue, multiple tentacles, but whatever we can address wherever we look at it. But it's gotten my thoughts started on that front. We have Mansi here as well. Mansi is building a business in water management. She's from Stanford. Mansi, you had a question.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pooja. Hi, Priya. Thanks so much for all the insights. It was really great. So my question is, and I guess for context, we are kind of just about to enter fundraising. And so a question I've been wondering about is, what do you see in entrepreneurs not thinking enough about in terms of who they want on the cap table, what kinds of terms they should and shouldn't agree to? How do you see the entrepreneur-investor relationship going wrong post-investment as a result of these things?
Mansik, let me answer one by one. Like I said, I think it's very important for founders to do their research on investors as much as investors kind of pick the companies that they go behind. I think it's a very important part. And I personally think very few founders actually think. And there again, the network comes very handy because, I've seen at least a lot of today, if you see the new gen founders, they definitely, I would say, do your diligence on us as much as we do the diligence on you, right? It's very important. You have to pick up a couple of founders, see their experience, because look, this is a long journey. You want to make sure that how people behave in crisis, to me, is a lot more character defining, not when things are going great, right? Both from the founder as well as from the investor, right? And I always tell my founders, I always tell my portfolio companies, boss, over communicate when things hit bad, right? It's okay if you don't say that you've got 100% growth month on month, that's fine. But if it's bad, then over communicate then, because we all can huddle and see what we can do, right? So I think the first thing is for you to actually do research on, I would look at how many people have taken bets on this space or adjacent spaces. Look at individual partners you like or you relate to. For example, even today, if I'm going to speak to, say, somebody in the US, a VC, I try and listen to a podcast of theirs just to get a pulse of what they are as a person, what are their thoughts, what are their perspectives, right? So do your research. And even in VC funds, you want to pick an individual, right, who you will speak to. And of course, you might start with an associate and get boiled up or whatever, but that research really helps. Now, on the cap table, I would say, your first fundraise, you need true believers. So it's a little different from if a branded VC becomes a believer, nothing like it. But, in a market where, say, for example, and there are two parts to it. One is, let's go to the very, very good part where, there, like, you've got a term sheet and there are 5 people suddenly, like, everybody wants it, right? And the thumb rule there, I tell my founders at least, is go with a guy who genuinely has the conviction. Don't go with guys who just have a brand name, who probably have been around, but the conviction was more from the fact that, they are like, somebody has put in and they want to get in on the deal. Don't do that, right? Like, go at least in the early stage. You need believers, because believers will be patient, believers will understand the nature of the business, and they'll support you. So go with believers. If the believers happen to be a branded VC, that's great. Now let's take the other situation where you're finding it very, very hard to raise money. That's when, friends, family, and put together your early network of people and get them to support you, and pick that amount of. What you need to be clear is, it really helps for you if you go to select VCs or select investors, understand from them what are the North Star metrics or what you need to solve for before somebody gets excited about you, and raise money to solve for that. And keep them informed, like do a monthly newsletter, bi-weekly, once in 2 week newsletter, to talk about your progress and everything, and build a relationship so that people don't just come in and evaluate you at a transactional level. And the third question that you asked was on the stake. Look, it's a wide range, right? What you need to be cognizant of is, this is a continuing business. You don't want to give away too much. But again, it's a function of who is willing to give your first capital. Now, very often I've seen founders give away too much because nobody else was willing to bet on them, and they take a few 100K and they give away 25-30%. Now, if these guys take off, then the cap table becomes a big, big, big challenge for the next set of investors to come, because you've already diluted. Typical thumb rule is, founders should at least have 65 to 70% at the time of Series A minimum, right? That's a very, very good benchmark to have, right? Because you're going to be raising more, and each round it's going to be a 20-25% dilution, give or take money, right? So if you dilute too soon, too much, then you're in trouble, because it becomes very hard to set right that cap table later, because it means your existing investors will have to like kind of recap. Nobody likes to recap. The new guys, everybody's finding an excuse to walk away, unless you like everybody really loves you. So you don't want to make this an excuse to walk away.
Thanks so much, Priya. That was really insightful.
Great. We are at. Yeah,
Oh,
go
sorry.
ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if, so I think one thing is how much dilution you're willing to go through at the first raise. I'm wondering if there are other terms and conditions to also be wary of in terms of, let's say, options for employees, etc. Just other places you've seen things go wrong besides the percentage dilution.
Look,
If
some
at
of the most seasoned investors keep the term sheet and the terms very simple, Mansi, because when you're so early in the game, your mind share should not be sitting and deliberating and spending like hours and spending lawyers' fees on like terms. Survival of the company is the biggest thing for both of us to solve for, right? So some of the most seasoned investors keep the term sheet as simple. The core terms will include, of course, your post-money valuation, your dilution, and the ESOP pool, which is very, very important, especially if you're a single founder or if you're just two founders where the tech or something has to be filled in. Generally, a 10% post in investment ESOP pool is minimum. In fact, I've seen very good founders keep up to 15-20% as well, because they understand there's a capability gap and they want to bring in some very senior people. And so ESOP is the next thing. And then, very standard stuff, right? Like you just want to make sure that, standard vesting and, basic employability agreement where you agree on what are your salaries. And then I think that's about it. I don't think, what kind of amuses me is when people sit and talk about exit. And of course, what founders generally are very careful about what constitutes costs, because you have this whole set of clauses which talk about when can a founder be evicted by the board, what constitutes costs, and all of that. But these are all like, unfortunately, because it's a legal document, you're solving for the lowest probability. But that's probably something that people go back and forth. But I get very amused when people sit and negotiate on liquidation preference, on exit and all. I keep saying, boss, we shouldn't be wasting time on this. Let's see if we can raise Series A. That should be our goal. Let's get our first 100 customers. So I would say keep it super simple. Keep the number of terms super simple. And one thing I've also noticed, Mansi, with founders is, please speak to fellow founders more than your lawyers, because very often, sometimes when you get too many lawyers too early on, they want to value add, they interfere in commercial agreements, and then it spoils the whole thing. right? So actually network more with fellow founders and get a pulse, because you need to take smart commercial calls which optimizes for everybody, and not really get into this long winded trivial stuff which really makes no difference to anybody's life at this stage.
Great. I completely agree. And this is a good thing to keep a lookout on in terms of term sheets that were handed. So thank you.
Thank you, Priya. So we have, I mean, I think we can still continue this conversation for another hour, but we are at 11:35. Thank you so much, Priya. This was really for me, as again a founder building a business right now. For personally, for me, it was very useful, and I'm sure for other founders here as well. Um, some of the things around, as an entrepreneur, as you're building, just the fine line between persistence and dog-headedness, just reading between the lines to hear the feedback. And the what I've found is the advantage of going in and talking to the VCs and doing the fundraising. It gives you that clarity of thought. It forces you to put your thoughts on paper around certain frameworks, and it really gives you that clarity of thought and forces you to think, okay, over the next 3 years, how are you going to expand from here? So there is just a value in just doing that on your own. And then from an investor perspective, just having that clarity of thought is important as a founder, and communicating it to anybody you talk to, whether it's a customer or an investor. Um, and this deep understanding of customer personas, who are you going after, and being authentic. Not just it doesn't hold true just for leaders or managers, but also for entrepreneurs as well, because I think people understand that, like as a venture capitalist, you are evaluating so many different companies. You're speaking to hundreds of entrepreneurs in a month. You kind of build that antenna, which kind of goes up automatically, where you see that ingenuity. So it's always great to be authentic, vulnerable, and understand your world very, very deeply and communicate it. So thank you so much, Priya. Any other parting thoughts? And we'll communicate. I know where you are at Twitter, so
I'm not at Twitter. I mean, like, I'm a fake Twitter person. I'm there because everybody is there. All the VCs are there. So I'm also putting attendance.
Your team member is there, right? Aviral is very active.
Viral does all my work. He's the stud. He does all the work. I think parting thought is like, I mean, you've just articulated it beautifully. I cannot emphasize the value of being real and authentic, because trust me, that is so liberating. And I know very often, and I'm happy to share it with the group. And I will say this to anybody, that I'm sometimes, even today, when I go to board meetings, I do feel fish out of water. I do feel that I'm probably like, the person sticking out like a sore thumb. But I have learned to just embrace me, and I'm going to speak my mind. I'm okay, and I'm okay to stand corrected. I'm okay to acknowledge, because one of the things I realize is, if you have an opinion, you also have an obligation to change that opinion if new data presents itself. But it's okay, right? So say your piece, be real, because trust me, it is so liberating, because then you can focus on all the right things.
Right. Wonderful. Great.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Priya. And
can we have a quick picture?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. If everyone can just switch on their cameras, then we can take a quick picture.